Hello, hello, and welcome to the User Research Strategist podcast. I am your host, Nikki Anderson, and I am joined today by Steve. Hi, Steve.
Hello, Nikki. Great to join you today.
I know I'm so excited because we are talking about something very near and dear to my heart in one way, games user research and why user research, like how it's involved in game development, which I am just so super psyched because Pokemon is my life. And so is World of Warcraft and Zelda and all of these fun things. So I can't wait to chat with you. But before we dive into all of the wonderful things that we'll talk about, do you mind just giving a quick introduction to our audience today?
Of course. So my name's Steve Bromley. I'm a games user researcher. I've worked in the games industry for, I think, about 14 years now. I was lucky enough to start my career at PlayStation in London in the UK. That was quite a nice place to learn because PlayStation, being a publisher of games, means you get exposed to a whole variety of different teams and different team sizes. They have reasonably small indie type games, they have giant AAA games. And so you really get a good overview of what is the impact of research in different team sizes and different game development environments. That was a really nice place to learn. Since then, I've been a freelance consultant, so helping teams both run studies or build that in-house capability to lead studies, and done quite a lot for advocacy of games user research. I started a mentoring scheme with the IGDA to help people learn how to do careers in this space. I've wrote a couple of books related to user research and games, and really excited to talk about the topic as we're going to today.
Amazing. Thank you. So, yeah, diving into it, is there any particular reason you went into games in terms of 14 years ago? Was there a trigger for that?
I think, like many people who end up in games, it's a combination of well, largely luck and circumstance.
Yeah.
Like many people, I grew up playing games. I had a Nintendo 64. I used to play a lot of PC games when I was a teenager, and then kind of faded away as I went to university and thought, okay, that's the end of gaming for me. I was very lucky when I went back to study a master's that I was studying under Graham McAllister. He was forming a games user research lab in Brighton where I was studying. And that just taught me that this field exists, that you can run user research for games. And at that time, it was very immature as an industry, and it still is very early in its games user research journey. But that just exposed me to, okay, we can put people in front of games while you're making games. You can learn what players are understanding or where they're getting confused, and we can iterate games. So that luck of being exposed to Graham's work, and also he very helpfully hooked me up with a local studio in Brighton to do a dissertation project, was enough for me to set me on that trajectory and eventually get my first role at PlayStation.
Oh, that's amazing. I love that. It feels very natural in a way
Mm,
that you got into it very naturally. And congratulations for you for leaving gaming behind a little bit. Because when I moved to university, I was like, cool, no adult supervision.
yes, no, 24-hour LAN parties, all that type of thing.
Yeah, that was a bit of a downfall for me at some points. I'm like, class, World of Warcraft. Guess which one?
Yeah. Well, yeah,
Yeah.
I've obviously come full circle because I'm back there again with gaming being the main thing that takes up my work day and then relaxing with other games after the work day. But at least I had that mini break in the middle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm actually curious, like this is kind of a side quest, I guess. Does doing games user research make you annoyed when playing video games or any sort of games?
I think it gives me a lot more empathy for game developers. So you see online, and one of the challenges with gaming as an industry is because it has such an active fan base, because they're talking about it endlessly online. There are huge voices in that space, which also are very distracting for developers. They might pay a lot of attention to what the internet says. But having seen the inside of game development through my role, I think it gives you a lot of empathy for why things are like the way they are. No one making a game is trying to make bad decisions or trying to make something that is not usable, but often it's a series of compromises based on the amount of time that they have. That we could talk about the market factors influencing games, but there are reasons why their game development processes are often slightly suboptimal. That mean actually game developers often know some of these issues that are coming out and just not in a position to fix them. And so it does build a lot of empathy for when you do see usability issues, not just thinking, those game developers didn't know what they were doing. I can't believe that they made such an obvious mistake. And instead, starting to look at those factors of, okay, I wonder what caused this to have to be in the game at launch at the end.
Interesting. Okay. Because I feel like we can kind of go certain ways as user researchers where we're like, oh my gosh, I can't deal with any usability issues on any website ever. It's so frustrating because I know you can fix this. But also understanding as a researcher all the constraints that all of our stakeholders are under and being like, oh, this poor team is probably really suffering.
It's exactly that. And one of the things I see people at the beginning of their career or juniors doing that I think doesn't build strong relationships with their team is going in with that arrogant angle of, well, you obviously didn't know there was a problem here, and I'm coming in with the universal truth of telling you you did the bad thing, which yeah doesn't build strong relationships with our stakeholders because they instead we need to understand the environment in which that decision was made and then come back with a more nuanced viewpoint. So yeah, it's a learning journey I've been on, and I've seen others have to go on as well.
Yeah, I came in with that arrogance and it did not bode well for me. My stakeholders were like, well, we're not going to engage with you anymore. You're not fun to work with.
Yeah, it really fails when our ultimate success is measured in impact. I think it fails that impact test if we make everyone upset at us.
Yeah, yeah, you're impacting all the wrong things. Amazing. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about like the behind the scenes of like how does games user research work? Like if we talk about maybe, and I know that this is the hardest question for like a consultant to answer, like what does a typical project look like?
Yeah, so I think at its base level, a lot of it is very similar to user research in other fields. It is running a study where we'll go and get some representative players, we'll put them in front of something that represents what the game is, and have come in with some objectives about whether players understand it, whether they can get through it, those type of questions.
Do you want to get all of your user research questions answered, all while hanging out on your couch in sweatpants? No need to join any live webinars and hope that your question gets answered. No need to Google a million different things and sift through some scattered advice that you don't really know is valid or reliable. Not anymore. I know it sounds too good to be true, but I promise it isn't, because if you become a paid Substack subscriber, you get access immediately to a community filled with user researchers that I am in every single day answering questions. Not only can you hang out on your couch, feel less alone as a user researcher, and get all of your questions answered, not only by an expert, but by a bunch of other user researchers with amazing perspectives and experience, you can do all of that on your couch in sweatpants, and I will be alongside there with you every step of the way. So join my paid Substack, get immediate access, and we can relax together solving all of your user research problems. See you there.
I think some of the nuances for games, though, are, especially compared to the wider user research field and industry, it's probably because of the culture of games. The game development is an interesting mixture of, yes, it's a business and you're making a commercial product, but also there's an element of art there that a lot of people making it are recognizing what they're making as an artistic endeavor and that they're trying to put their creative vision into the world. So we have to try and work out how do we balance that not impacting the creative vision with still creating something that's usable and fun and enjoyable. For a researcher, I think the first impact you'll notice of that if you're coming in from another field is there isn't really a huge culture of doing discovery research. You can see in other fields where, hey, if you were making a taxi app or a food delivery app, the first thing you'd want to do is go out into the world and learn how people get taxis currently or how they get food delivered, look out for some pain points, identify their user needs, and then come up with an idea for what this could be. Instead, the user needs for games is often a lot more nuanced or just much simpler. From a player's experience, their primary goal, their motivation is let's do something entertaining with my time, and they might have some constraints based around where they're playing or the length of time they have, but ultimately the high level user need is let's have an enjoyable experience. And so we have to rely a lot more heavily on what is the design vision trying to achieve, what is the creative vision, what is the artistic direction for this game. And that means discovery research doesn't exist in the same way. Instead of a lot more of your studies are evaluative. You
Mhm.
might start with, okay, what do we expect players to feel at this point, or what do we expect players to understand at this point, and then run a usability test or a mass playtest. We could talk about methods in a second as well, if interesting. But yeah, you're doing a lot more evaluative research to see is it achieving the design vision rather than finding is it meeting some inherent user needs. In many ways, that can be a bit more immature, I think, to user research elsewhere. That kind of usability focused testing, I think a lot of tech industry has moved on from and does a lot more work in discovery. They recognize the impact of that. Perhaps it's something about the maturity of the games industry. Perhaps it is inherently an issue with testing a creative endeavor. A lot of what we do is usability testing and evaluative research as well.
Gotcha. And I'm curious on the scale of like fidelity of the
Mm.
games, right? Are you ever, because like I'm trying to relate it back to almost like that like lower fidelity like concept testing versus the higher fidelity like usability like quant usability almost. Are you testing a spectrum of fidelity or is it generally like towards the end?
Yeah, I think there is that spectrum of fidelity. The production processes for how games are made aren't very standardized, but it's reasonably common to start with first a prototype where you might be running around in a entirely grey environment, just interacting with one enemy, that type of thing. And at that point, the game team are interested in did it feel right? Did it feel satisfying? If we made a whole game worth of this, would could we hang a game off these core mechanics? And so yeah, you're working a very low fidelity thing at that point. And then as the game goes on, part of the problem starts to become scale. Games can be, well, short end, they can be 20 hours long. Many games are over 100 hours long. And all of that you will want to check that players can get through, that the difficulty is balanced correct. And so you might end up being pointed more towards more quantitative methods, but you will be testing from that very earliest prototype to the campaign is almost ready. Let's check that players can actually get through a whole campaign. So yeah, the fidelity does change as you go through.
Interesting. And I'm curious how you measure like because we talk about the user needs being like I want to have an enjoyable experience, and as a video game player, so I'll take World of Warcraft for example. I'm a casual player now,
Mhm.
especially. I used to be a lot more hardcore, but like as a player, as a casual player, it's actually quite a frustrating game because I never have the time to put in to actually be good enough for pretty much anything. So I tend to get really stuck with things. And I'm curious, like, how do you measure like because like and then I'm like, nostalgia. I love this game. Let me collect some pets because that's like Pokemon, right? Like so like I oscillate quite a lot. And I'm wondering like are there ways that you measure like overall enjoyment when
Mm.
in games I can imagine there are a lot of frustrating experiences.
It is one of the biggest challenges, and also one of the fundamental things that every team wants is a question of is this game fun or are people enjoying it? I think especially your example with World of Warcraft, because that game is so huge and has so many disparate elements and had existed for a long time. At that point, they're probably looking at a feature by feature level and using a combination of what's the impact on players' playtime and some quant measures alongside something slightly more qualitative or subjective. But yeah, those questions do exist from the very first prototype. So you might just have a game where you can run around and just imagine the first level of Mario. You're running, you can jump on an enemy. Does that feel right? Do players enjoy doing this? Is this good enough? It is inherently quite a subjective topic, which is very difficult for us as researchers to work with. I think some of the early steps we would take, so a team will always come with that question of, is this game fun? And I think that one of the earliest steps we have to take as a researcher is just spend time with a team and stakeholders to help them define what do we mean by fun? Are there specific emotions that we're looking for and we can try and measure for an emotional response?
Mhm.
Is it a change in behavior we're looking for? Do we hope that they're going to, having completed this level, play level two, in
Mhm.
which case we'll focus on that. So yeah, it's such a messy and a nuanced problem that teams definitely want to know if things are fun, but we then need to probe a bit deeper to try and define, okay, what is fun? I mean, you will start with a score. You'll ask players, rate this thing on from 0 to 10,
Mhm.
but when you get that result back saying they rated this thing 7, that's not actually actionable information at that point. We need to have gone a bit deeper than that.
Absolutely. I totally get that. And I think if we broaden it to like the field of user research, it's like teams coming to us being like, do people like it? It's like,
Yes,
well, what does that, you know, what does that even mean? Right. Like there are so many different nuances, contexts, but confounding variables and there's so much subjectivity that goes into that.
exactly. Hopefully we can push them something behavioral that we can actually explore. Like, would they use this again?
Yeah.
Do they use this again? In fact, is it even better? Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I love that. This is so fascinating. Yeah. So you had mentioned different methods, and I think you had mentioned that the usability tester like mass play.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's right. So again, one of the challenges that we work with in the games industry is there's a very high level of secrecy because it's an entertainment field. There a lot of money is spent on marketing. For many popular games, more money is spent on marketing the game than the actual development of the game. And just like with films, they have a whole plan of here's we're going to release our first teaser, and then we're going to show this feature a few months later, like building up the hype as they go along. Combined with that, you also have a very active fan base, as we mentioned a minute ago, where people are hungry for information, and if leaks happened or things are announced early, suddenly it's all over Reddit and everyone's talking about it, and it throws the marketing plans into disarray. That's a challenge for us as researchers because we want to show people things early because we want feedback while the team can still iterate on it. And that has an implication on our methods for traditionally, and there are elements of this changing, but I think still inherently part of what we do. Traditionally, we rely very heavily on lab-based methods as a result. Places where you can control the environment. We can make sure that players don't have their phones on them. They can't take photos. They can't put a screenshot on the internet. We'll be careful with our screening to make sure that the participants don't know each other and so couldn't verify the information to a journalist or something like that, just to make sure that they're minimizing that risk of information leaking out of the playtest. The reason that's a challenge is because we still have quant questions.
Yeah.
There are things you might want to measure quantitatively that traditionally you would send a survey out to 100 people or do an open beta type thing where we just can't risk that stuff ending up on the internet. And so the culture inside games has been to build mass playtest labs where you can bring in 20 people, 40 people. Some in America have 80 people being able to play at the same time, so that you can have a controlled environment where people can not leak, but you do get enough people that you can start to take quantitative measures, getting players, for example, to rate the difficulty of this level versus this level, and then you've got enough data that you can compare on a statistical level to see if there is a difference. So yeah, mass playtests, especially later in development when again the campaign can be 20 hours or more. There's just so much content you have to get through. You couldn't do that in a one-to-one setting because that would take forever. You need to find ways of getting a lot of players in front of your game in a safe environment. Yeah, leads to interesting methods that you don't see elsewhere.
Yeah, so interesting. And I'm curious, does that help solve for any multiplayer dynamics? Because I can imagine, there are solo games, but like when you throw multiple people and open environment, open world into it, that it gets a bit more complicated as well.
I think that's very much the case, especially if it's a multiplayer game with a reasonably limited number of participants, like Call of Duty or any sort of first-person shooter. You will hire people to all come in and play at the same time. For something massively multiplayer, I think you might start looking at bots and things to pretend to be other players. But yes, definitely a reasonably common study design that we'll do is bringing in two teams of four players, and they'll just play multiplayer games against each other to look at things like the balance of the levels or does it feel fun and those type of questions.
Hey everyone, I have been taking some business courses recently and am launching a new membership that's all about how user researchers can become more business savvy, more strategic, and more of a business partner in their organizations. One of the biggest questions that I get asked is, hey, my organization isn't really mature. It has like a low user research maturity level. Please do not let the maturity of your organization dictate your user research career. That's what I did. Because I was in a lower user research maturity, I kind of let my self-stagnate and I didn't really learn new things. And with that, my skills kind of like deteriorated. I lost a lot of time that I could have used to learn really, really important skills because they weren't necessarily applicable to my organization at that time. But guess what? I got fired. And then it didn't really matter what maturity level my organization was at because I was no longer there. And I wished that I had taken the time to learn some of these skills because they would have been applicable at the next places that I went into. I know that it can be hard sometimes and frustrating when you're in a low maturity organization and you want to push things, you want to learn new things, but please, please, please don't let your current organization and their levels of maturity impact your future career because I promise you, you will not be there forever and you will need the skills that you need to learn in the future. Promise, 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 especially with the user research industry changing and us hopefully moving into that more strategic space and operating more as business partners and innovation partners to our organizations. Also, if you want more details on my membership and how to become a little bit more business oriented as a researcher, check out the link that I have and I hope that helps.
And I'm curious, do you ever bring like different segments together? Like almost like if you think of I'm this is probably too broad of a generalization, but I'm thinking about like segmenting like casual versus more hardcore players and like bringing those together into an environment in which they probably will overlap.
Yes, that's a good point. So segmentation and recruitment definitely does look at like your playing habits and the amount of time you play playing games and your experience with other games and things like that. So behavioral things that will indicate what level of background knowledge you bring into the session and are you part of the target market. Yeah, I don't know if I've explicitly done that. I think it's a really interesting question. Done that explicitly. Let's put casual players against more hardcore players. But I definitely can see the value of that. You can imagine in a real life environment, there should be tools and the game to support that happening in a way that makes it fun for both teams. And so you'll also want to test that matchmaking and that side of it. I haven't actually run that as a study myself. Perhaps it's something that you might do post-launch where you've got people, lots of thousands of people playing the game, and you can start to look at that kind of matchmaking at a very high quant level.
Yeah, I wish Blizzard would do that. I'm I'm just selfishly like, how do I get my casual gameplay to be more fun?
Yes. Yeah, it does feel like there's a gap. If the reason that you're not enjoying the game is because other people are too like
Camping me.
taking all the fun, it does feel like there's a gap there, and they should be creating features or things that make it accessible for someone who dedicates less playtime to it.
Yeah. And I'm also curious, this might be like a left field question a little bit, but in games where complete strangers who might have a certain anonymous nature talk to each other, is there like ever any research that you do within like that function of like we're shoving a bunch of like anonymous people together who might be mean to each other or who might have to like figure stuff out together?
Yeah, so it's not something I've done myself, although I think that field definitely exists because toxicity is a problem online. People are mean to themselves in any space, and then a semi-anonymous space like you're on a team in a multiplayer game with them and they don't know who you are, and at the end of that session, you'll never see them again. It's just a recipe for people saying horrible things and being abusive and all the things that we want to avoid.
Yeah.
I think over time, game designers have learnt techniques and tools to try and manage that. So minimizing voice chat, or you might remember on things like Rocket League, where you can only use pre-selected statements rather than coming up with a new statement. But it is a continued issue. And I think it is a thing that, especially if you're doing an online game, you will have a preconception from design about how are we going to manage this. But it will go through testing at some point to make sure that actually you can't be horrible to people online.
Imagine that.
Yes.
If only. I feel like
Yeah.
it's just like a charged emotional state when people are often in these environments. So I can understand. Yeah.
Especially many games have high skill ceilings, as in people can get very, very good at it. And then, as you say, people get very frustrated if their team members are not as good as them. There's a new free-to-play game, Marvel Rivals, that came out over Christmas. And I played it for an hour. I was obviously terrible at it because it's a team-based online game and I have no idea what I'm doing. And I'm sure I was frustrating and annoying everyone else. no one was mean to me. So I guess they must have also been through that journey of how do we minimize toxicity and how do we make it so on your first play, you don't just have people who are better at the game shouting at you.
Yeah, like how do you mitigate those situations and scenarios? Yeah. Amazing. And I'm curious because we're starting to come up to the end of our time, which makes me very sad. But if you had to describe like the number one challenge within games user research, what would that be for you?
That's a great question. I think it probably alludes to some of the themes we've talked about earlier, where games do come from a creative space, and a lot of people working in design on that doing it because of their love of games. In fact, that's the thing about the games industry is everyone's there because they are really interested in games. That I mean, right, people are very passionate about what they do. Just like with other fields, though, I think that can have an implication on how teams engage with research. In theory, everyone's on board with, well, we know it's for players and we need to put players in front of it, and we understand that this is what we should be doing because ultimately it's for players. There's a combination of practical challenges with how games are made, and also a degree of fear because it is a creative vision. You're putting yourself out into the world that might hold back teams from testing as regularly and as often as they perhaps could be. So longer term, I think some of the challenges that we face as games user researchers is how do we both remove practical barriers, making it easier to test more often, but also bring hearts and mind along with us, convincing game developers that it's safe to put your game in front of players. The feedback is going to be constructive and not negative, and ultimately encourage them to be doing more of this throughout the development process.
Yeah. I think that that's so interesting because I see that maybe on a slightly smaller scale with like somebody was taking a shower and had a great idea about a feature that we should put into our product, which is like not based on any sort of foundational information. It was just like, oh my goodness, this is the best idea. And it's like their pet project. And I can understand that when you place creativity, art into that, like, so I'm a fiction writer and I send my pages to my book editor and it is terrifying because I'm just like, this is like it's me. You know, you're putting part of yourself out there, so I can imagine that that can be really difficult to receive critical feedback.
I think you're right. This is in any sort of tech industry, managing people's ideas and pet projects and things that they feel attached to is a challenge that we all face, and especially so in games.
Yeah, I can imagine that. It's like I spent like 7 years thinking of this idea and it's finally coming to fruition and I've put so much time and effort and it's like, uh-oh. Um, you
And then
know,
you run the study, and on the other side of the study, they say, well, those probably weren't the right users, or they weren't our users.
those aren't the right people for my vision. Yeah. Amazing. So, Steve, thank you so much. I know that you have quite a few resources available for people who are like maybe interested in this. Could you just talk through some of the things that you have available?
Of course, yes. If people are interested either in exploring this as a career, if you're just a user researcher currently, or if you're working in games already and just want to learn how to apply user research to your production process, I write a lot of articles on this topic and have some both a free and a paid for book as well. It's all at gamesuserresearch.com and probably turned up on Google if you just search games user research. But yeah, do take a look, do get some of the articles and the free books, and just get in touch if you have questions. I love talking about user research in the field of video games, and so excited to meet your community.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, I'll put all of those links to your website, to courses, to resources in the show notes. So everybody should be able to find those. And yeah, it's always when you're exploring something new, it's always great to like have some great resources to start with. So I'm very appreciative for you putting all of those things out there. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to come and talk today. I've enjoyed our chat.
Yeah, yeah, it's been so fun. I honestly like it's hard for me to be like, okay, Nikki, time's time's up. We gotta stop because I'm just like, oh, I want to know everything about this. And I guess one final question. If somebody was like, ooh, like this feels like a right fit for me, is there like one tip that you might recommend to them for like exploring this space or maybe getting into the space?
Yeah, perhaps, especially if you do have a user research background, one of the first things you could do is start to think about how do I apply my research skills to to this space, perhaps taking a game that you've played recently or a game that has come out recently, looking out for some usability reviews, doing some sort of mini usability issues, doing some sort of mini usability review, and writing a blog post about it is a great first start. It's a thing you can show to hiring managers. It just starts you exploring and thinking about this space.
Yeah, I love that. That's perfect. Amazing. Yeah, I think I'm my first when I was getting into the field, and you know how you have to do case studies before you get into user research, almost like your personal ones. I did one on World of Warcraft. So yeah, I feel I'm like, this is relevant. Like it's such a great way to like immerse yourself and understand something and try it out.
Is that still on the internet? Can people read that?
No. Oh my goodness. It was horrific. It's actually they no longer have the app, which is actually really sad because I was like, oh, it's quite a good app. But no, it's not on the internet. Maybe I can dig it up and find it one day, but I might be sad and scared to share it with the world.
That's always the case, isn't it? But yeah, fun learning experience.
Yeah, amazing. Well, Steve, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to talk to you today, and I really, really appreciate you coming on the show.
Fantastic. Thank you again. And yeah, speak soon.
Yeah, amazing. And thank you to everybody who's listening, and we'll see you again very soon.